Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined with Brooke. Brooke, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brooke and I have a fascinating subject that we're going to discuss today. Some really cool ideas. Her background is super relevant to the topic today. So to set the stage, Brooke, do you mind sharing a little bit about your background, some of your marketing experience, just a little bit for the audience to get to know you a little bit better?
I came up in journalism. So my educational background is in reporting. So my first foray into the working world was as a community news reporter, which means I was covering everything and anything under the sun, from sporting events to city council meetings, land use planning, breaking news, accidents, everything. And eventually made my way into content marketing by way of PR. I got super burned out in news reporting and didn't see a lot of professional opportunity for myself there. So transitioned into PR, just trying to explore other ways to use my writing and storytelling abilities. Didn't love PR. And then by happenstance ended up it started out as a copywriting role at a company called WebPT, which is a physical therapy software, B2B SaaS product. And just learned marketing basically by doing. So we grew the entire marketing team and the content marketing function significantly over the 8 years that I was at the company. So I saw a lot of change, a lot of growth, absolutely fell in love with content marketing. It was a great place to learn and grow because our founders were so bought into the power of content and specifically the power of thought leadership. It was really something we hung our hat on. So a great place to build a content powerhouse. But then, I had been there for so long, I got the itch to build again. And so spread my wings and left the nest and bounced around a little bit again, spent some time at an SMS marketing software called Postscript, which is in the e-commerce space. Learned a lot there. It was awesome. But ultimately, my heart was still in healthcare. I love the healthcare space. I love our customers. I love the connection to helping people who help people. So now I'm at a company called Elios Health. It's a documentation automation software for behavioral health clinicians.
Awesome background. And Brooke made sure when we were talking before, she made sure I knew they did AI before AI was cool. So it's fun to know that they're on the OG AI side.
We are AI hipsters. I always have to caveat that this was before ChatGPT. All of our AI models are proprietary and specific to behavioral health.
I love it. That's awesome. We have a fun subject for today. I'm really passionate about this. The idea of telling stories is the reason I love content marketing. And sometimes when we have content formats that aren't super narrative, things like your webinars and presentations and things like that, it can be really difficult to actually tell the story or repurpose it or reformat it. Brooke has some great ideas of how she'll take a piece of content that's not super narrative. She'll follow this kind of formula and outline and this guideline process that she's going to share today. And she can turn it into a narrative piece of content. And I think there's some really good pieces to this that can really help you enhance your repurposing strategy. So let's dive into it. Okay, Brooke. So let's say you've got this webinar and it's just like a PowerPoint presentation. There is no story to it all. And you're trying to turn this into a narrative piece of gold. How do you approach that? How do you start? What do you start doing with that kind of content?
There are a few different ways that you can repurpose that kind of content. I think a lot of people default to just an overall summary, or what I like to call the book report formula. So you're just taking the entire thing from start to finish and distilling it into maybe a written summary that's just linear. And that's fine. You're going to get value out of that. If nothing else, it's giving Google something to crawl on your website. And you can also, leverage video snippets or whatever to work in there and make something that's like a 60-minute long presentation a little bit more snackable. And that's great. And as I mentioned before, when we were talking, like, I think this is a really great use case now for ChatGPT. You can take the transcript from this presentation or event, give it to ChatGPT and get something to work from. So it can be a lower lift way to repurpose. Another way is something that we did a lot at WebPT is turning it into an FAQ. So this was particularly great for us because we always had a Q&A portion in our webinars. So we would ask the audience for questions. We typically didn't get to all of them, but we would make this FAQ blog post as a follow-up piece of content to answer the questions that we didn't get to and summarize the answers to the questions that we answered live. So that's like a really good way to make something that's a little more scannable. People can kind of explore the content that resonates with them via this FAQ follow-up post. And it's also really, really great for long tail SEO. So those FAQ posts that we made at WebPT were always high performing in terms of capturing search for long tail keywords. And it also gives you some really, like, this is a side note, it gives you some really great ideas for content in the future. Like some of those questions, like the answers, I would get so long. Like, this answer to this question is like 3 paragraphs. We should just make a whole blog post out of this. But what I really like to do, and this is a little bit more time consuming, a little bit more resource heavy, but I think this is where you get the most value out of these, events, webinar recordings, what have you, is taking it and turning it into something that's completely different. Taking this, whether it's an interview style, a presentation style, whatever, taking the essence of the content or the information in that asset and turning it into a story that someone who's reading the story may not even recognize that it came from that original webinar presentation or whatever. And the way that I approach this is much the same as I would approach covering an event when I was a reporter. So I would go to the event, like say it was a city council meeting. I'm sitting there for an hour and a half and I'm taking all these notes in my little reporter notebook. And then I go back to the office and I run back through my notes. I might have jotted down a few direct quotes. I open up a Word document, a Google document now. This is showing my age. I open up a Google document and start entering some of those quotes and tidbits into the document. And then in my brain, I'm already starting to group these by like theme, or maybe it's like I'm pulling out, maybe I'm not using everything, but I'm like pulling out a couple of key themes that I know are going to resonate with readers. And so maybe I pull those up to the top and then start building the entire story around those. I think there's like this feeling that a summary or a piece of content inspired by like a presentation or an event needs to be comprehensive. And that's not the case. You can use bits and pieces and build it into, whatever story you think is going to be the most interesting, most relevant for your audience. So anyway, I start playing around with it. Maybe I put in some like working subheads, start to like get an idea of, maybe this is going to be like a lessons learned kind of post. Maybe it's going to be a tips post. Maybe there's 4 or 5 different people that were giving advice based on their own experience. Maybe like this is going to be a how-to post. So you start just sort of seeing these patterns once you place the individual elements, quotes, tidbits into the document, and goes from notes to outline to finished piece that has this narrative thread from, start to end. Maybe you can work in a few clips, audio clips, video clips to sort of strengthen that piece and make it more of like a multimedia kind of piece rather than just a straight blog post or article. So at the end, when you're done with it all, it's not in the order at all that the original presentation or webinar was in. It's something completely different. It's just packaged in a new way that hopefully resonates a bit more with, a reader in that particular medium. And I think that the analogy I used when we were talking before, it's sort of like, you build one Lego house and then you disassemble it and you build a different Lego house using all the same pieces, but it looks totally different.
Yeah, and I love that analogy. I think that there's a great visual there. So a question that I had while you were talking in journalism and how you do content marketing, finding these narratives, do you try to stick to one narrative per piece and potentially write 3 or 4 pieces if there are multiple narratives? Or do you feel like it's okay to combine multiple narratives into the same kind of a piece?
I think that it's probably easier to find one narrative and stick to it. I think that there are opportunities to create multiple pieces based on, one event or one long form asset. Trying to think of like an example of maybe where I had like multiple narratives. Can you clarify sort of?
No, yeah, I think it's a good, element here where for me personally, if I'm reading a piece of content, I'm hoping to get one thing out of it, probably specifically, trying to understand that one narrative. And I know in my experience, it typically works well to have one narrative with potentially the ability to link out to multiple narratives. Say, hey, by the way, here's a contrasting view that you can look at. Or, hey, they mentioned this, but I'm not going to go into that. Click here for that whole thought process and thread. I've seen that done really well. I just read an article today on this software Beehive for newsletters that I absolutely love. And this person was doing a breakdown, but they talked about how it integrated with Webflow. And they're like, hey, I have a whole lot of thoughts about Webflow, but I don't want to get off of this narrative. Click here. Here's the Webflow discussion. So that's kind of where I look at it on the single versus multiple narrative.
Is it okay to go off on tangents?
I guess better way. Yeah.
I think that it depends. Like, I definitely lean on the scenario you just talked about, where like, especially if I have another piece that goes in depth on a concept that I'm maybe glazing over, just like referencing in one piece. I love the link off strategy. And that's also, again, great for SEO. So I do love that. I've also used the strategy of quoting my own content. I'm like, in this blog post, we explained quote, and then to read the whole thing, click here. And the more content you produce, the better able you are, to make those references. But yes, I think that like keeping things succinct generally is probably the best policy. I have like, in some pieces, I'll use like visual separators. So like if I want to have kind of an excerpt that's talking about a concept that's relevant to that piece, but maybe like you could still go on reading and skip over this detail if you just don't care about it, like maybe separate that into like a box or like stylize it in a way that kind of like what you would see in like a magazine layout, where they have a story within a story. But you can always come back to that like littler like snippet story or like call out box.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great indicator. And I've seen that done really well now that you mention it. People focusing on a single narrative, but saying, hey, this one point is too important to pass up on. Here's 1-2 paragraphs. I'm going to put it in this call out box with a different background, almost like a footnote to, something. I read a really nerdy book the other day and they had a lot of footnotes about all these tangents that they didn't want to get separated on. But if you had interest, you could go into it. So I think that's another great way of keeping a narrative, but also showing you're not glossing over other components to the story and that you will address them, but it doesn't fit the narrative or doesn't fit that specific subject. Not that you're ignoring it, but you're trying to kind of condense it for the sake of the readership.
And that's really like, that's the beauty of digital content, is being able to link off to other things and like let people kind of choose their own journey of exploration. And you're just kind of giving them the road signs to do that.
I love that. That's awesome. All right. Well, any last minute tips? This goes by quick. We're already at 15 minutes. So any last quick tips that you want to share?
I mean, this is like only mildly related, but like a lot of people ask me what to do to like get better at this kind of writing, like narrative writing. And for me, it's reading. Like I read a lot. I read a lot of content, and particularly like high quality journalistic content, so that I can stay in touch with those roots and how those writers assemble such elegant stories. So I think it's important to expose yourself to good narrative writing on a frequent basis.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that some of the best writing nowadays is writing that you have to pay for.
100%.
So some kind of subscription or something like that, behind some kind of a paywall. Typically, you're going to get the full goodness that they're willing to provide. When it's free, it's almost like that free app that has advertisements, things like that. But when the content is the product, it's high quality content. And if you want to learn, I think that's a great avenue and a great place to start.
Yes. This year, I finally broke down and purchased, which is actually like not that expensive, but I purchased a subscription to The Atlantic and it's been amazing.
That is awesome. Yeah. So I think that there's some good, I finally I have Apple News Plus, and so I read the magazines that are behind that, and I find the content at just next level. So it's good stuff.
For sure.
Brooke, this is amazing. This is super helpful. I love what we were talking about today. If anyone wants to continue the conversation with you or connect online, how can they find you?
Find me on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm the most active professionally. Search Brooke Andrus, Andrus, and you should find me.
Very cool. Well, Brooke, thank you again for the time. Really appreciate it. And maybe we'll have you back on again to talk about some of these other subjects.
Awesome. I would love that. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.